Particularly given how the market looks today, if you were to go out and decide, I'm going to go buy a brand new professional trumpet, you'd be looking at spending at the very least basically $2,500 from the name brands, and oftentimes more like $3,000, $4,000, maybe as high as $5,000, without even really getting into boutique or custom territory. That is not financially feasible for a lot of people. It's a very daunting prospect to have to just plunk down that much dough in one go for one instrument. Now, what if I told you, if you go to the used market and you survey your options carefully and you know what it is that you're looking for, you could end up with very much a professional level Yamaha that has admittedly been out of production for a few decades, but is essentially a clone of a Schilke design, sometimes for under $1,000 US, and at the very least under $1,500. Let's talk about it. How's it going, everybody? It's your host Sam here from the Samuel Plays Brass channel. I hope you're all doing well, and I appreciate you tuning in as always. This is going to be a real interesting video. We're once again, like one of our last episodes on Scholastic Brass Special, going to be taking a look at Yamaha's discontinued models today. Now, this horn in my hands here is a Yamaha YTR-732 manufactured during the 70s, and it is the result of me looking for a backup trumpet that would not only play as close to as well as my Yamaha Bobby Shoe YTR-8310Z as possible, but as similarly as possible to the shoe. The shoe has really molded my expectations as a trumpet player for a trumpet to blow a certain way, and I figured the best I could do was go to Yamaha's catalog and find something that was, a medium bore, step bore, reverse lead pipe, large bell type design. And that is how I landed on this instrument. An ad came up for this instrument being posted by Rich Ida's Brass Instrument Workshop, which you can find up in the card if you'd like to check them out. I'm obviously not sponsored, but they did a great job doing whatever it is they did with this instrument, and they sold it to me for all of $800, which was really, really incredible. And this thing has definitely outplayed that price tag. Now, I figured I would combine this review with another discontinued Yamaha professional level instrument based on a Schilke, a Yamaha YTR-634 that I played on quite a while now, almost 2 years ago. That's what a lot of my backlogged footage is looking like these days. But it was a really cool instrument as well, and I figured we'd... See, I don't want to say kill two birds with one stone. I don't really like that saying. If you got a better alternative, let me know. But we'll accomplish two goals in one today by essentially putting both horns under the Yamaha 3-digit professional umbrella and talk about all of those sorts of horns and what you can look for as far as your ideal. Now, I do want to pause here for a quick announcement. You notice how this is already a fairly long video? Well, even then, I did not get to cover all of the information I wanted to in this video, and it has to do a lot with how I acquired this 732 and a couple of my other horns in the past, and how I settled on what I needed from a backup trumpet. That segment was just way too long to include in this, so if you want to see that and other exclusive content like that on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, please consider going to my Patreon, patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass, link in the description or in the card in the top right corner, and consider pledging $5 or more per month. The $5 tier guarantees you access to behind-the-scenes content like this. And I think as I grow ever more rambly with age, I think there is a lot of potential for little specials like this to come out here or there. So if you want to see how I looked for a backup trumpet and how I landed on the 732, once again, patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass. Now let's get back to the video. Now later on in this video, we will absolutely be going into more depth on this topic, and in fact, you can use the chapters below if you want to find that section, in case you decide to go down the older Yamaha professional avenue and you want to figure out which one is ideal for you. But the gist of Yamaha's early models is this. Up until about 1982, Yamaha's model numbers for trumpets, cornets, and flugelhorns utilized 3 digits, and the first of these digits indicated the build grade of the instrument. And when the first digit was something like a 6 through a 9, you could rest assured that you were talking about a professional level instrument. 6s and 7s were typically the standard entry-level professionals, and these early designs were based on Schilke trumpets. Typically, the 6s were lacquered and the 7s were similar to identical instruments but silver plated, and we'll get to the exact details of that later. Here are today's contestants. We're going to go over some of the specs now. Firstly, the one that I tried quite a while ago now was the YTR-634. You'll note that it's a 6 series, so it is in fact clear lacquered. It's got a standard medium-large bore at the valve section. Typically anything from 458 to 460 is considered medium-large, and this is on the upper end of that. And while it has the reverse lead pipe design, it is a straight bore, unlike our other contestant, although we'll go over more of that later. What's really cool about this instrument is the bell. This is a 90% copper red brass alloy. If you want to hear more about these alloys and what copper content does to the sound and functionality of an instrument, you can go to the video up in the card. But the point is, this is about 90-10 in terms of copper to zinc, and the flare is a full 5 inches, as opposed to the 4 7/8 that we see on a lot of modern professional instruments like Bach Strads, Yamaha Xenos, and whatnot. This is a fairly lightweight trumpet in spite of its large bell, and it is designed off of the Schilke B5. Now, the one that I own and have been playing a lot over the past few months, owing to how much I like it, is the Yamaha YTR-732. You'll note it's a 7 series, so it is in fact silver-plated, and furthermore, if you wanted a lacquered instrument that is very, very similar, you could, in theory, go for the YTR-632 instead. Now, the big difference, 6s and 7s notwithstanding, between the 32 and the 34 trumpets is the bore profile. You'll note that I put the bore down as a medium at 0.445 or 15 thousandths smaller than the 634, and that is true of the valve section. However, those next two words, step bore, really change the game a lot. A lot of Schilke trumpets are designed in this way, as is this instrument and as is my Bobby shoe, where the bore starts quite small at the beginning of the lead pipe, and then owing to the fact that it's a reverse lead pipe, the lead pipe tube actually goes all the way to the end of the tuning slide, where supposedly it expands all the way out to a large bore, which would probably be something like 462 or 463, although I haven't found exact numbers for that. That's typically what large indicates in the trumpet family. And then the bore actually steps down to that 445 at the bottom tube going into the valve section. And the reason that the bore goes through all of this goofiness in the first place is the fact that we end up with the most conical trumpet possible as a result. The lead pipe is very conical because we're going from quite small to quite large, and then, yes, the bore steps down, but from the valve section to the bell flare, we go from quite small to quite large. Whereas on the 634, we had about the normal amount of lead pipe expansion and about the normal amount of bell expansion, save for the fact that the flare was a little bit larger. Now, something to note about a lot of Yamaha 7 series silver-plated instruments is that they would have yellow brass bells, which is the standard about 70% copper that we typically see, rather than the red brass bells. This bell is made from yellow brass, and it once again has that 5-inch flare that I really like. This is, once again, quite a lightweight instrument, as is my shoe, and it is influenced by the Schilke B7. Now, we are going to jump right into some playing demos here, and I'll make a note here about mouthpieces as well. On the 634, I was using Clearwater's Schilke 20, which I used to demo a lot of horns over the years, and the 732 I demonstrated on a Bach large letter period 1C. Now, my reasoning for this is if we look at the online comparator at Trumpet Cloud, which you can find in the description if you want to mess around with it, it's a really, really fun site. You can see the Schilke 20 is very, very close to a Bach 1C, and I wanted to get kind of the most similar experience possible out of these two trumpets mouthpiece-wise, because both are very sensitive and mouthpiece receptive sorts of horns. So I wanted to make sure to eliminate as many confounding factors as possible. Now, as I get into dissecting and discussing my observations about these two horns with you, I want to turn your attention to a site called trumpethistory.com. Once again, link in the description. I know we're going crazy with the links today, but there are a lot of sources that helped make this video possible today, so I want to shout them out appropriately, even if I'm not sponsored or something fancy like that. And the thing with trumpethistory.com is it's got a Yamaha model code that not only supplied a lot of the information that we're consulting today, but has also helpfully informed my past couple of Yamaha purchases, which I think is pretty cool. Anyhow, the Yamaha model code has information supplied to us by user Glenn X on the Trumpet Master forum, and Glenn wrote this interesting little blurb kind of towards the bottom of this article that I think is really cool. I didn't even realize until I started planning out this video and I looked at the website again, but he talks about the exact two models that I played on in this video, which I think is really cool. What are the odds of that? Anyway, let me read you this blurb so that we can kind of set up my discussion of my impressions of these horns. The YTR is one sweet sounding horn. I would characterize it as being a very compact sound compared to the YTR-634, not necessarily a brighter tone, but a sweeter one. It is not as dark as the 634 and not as loud, which would make sense being a smaller bore. The sound is more together than the 634, more surrounding with less sense of projection. I felt like I was swimming in a warm trumpet sound, in the middle of the sound, whereas with the 634 it's more a feeling of projecting the sound forward. I think this is a very good basis off of which to build our discussion. Firstly, addressing projection. I think Glenn is on the money. When you compare two horns with very similar bells and fairly similar lead pipe geometries, the one with a standard 460 bore is going to have a couple more decibels on its top end than a horn with a 445 at the valve section. That much is true, even though the 460 is not going to take more air unless you physically open up the mouthpiece throat, which is the point of the greatest resistance on the apparatus. But as far as the whole darker, sweeter, softer mess, it does get a little bit trickier there. I personally tend to sound darkest on medium bores and step bores and things with the most conical bells possible. Now granted, there are confounding factors here because the 634 is indeed a red brass bell as opposed to the 732's yellow brass, and so that does make a difference. Firstly, lacquered horns do tend to sound maybe just 2-3% darker than their silver-plated counterparts, but when you change the alloy of the bell underneath the silver, that can make a really big difference. What I would argue is that the 732 does still sound sweeter, like Glenn said, but potentially darker in my hands as well. It really depends on the player, more so than anything. But that 732, having that step bore design where you have that big conical lead pipe flare and you have that very conical bell section out to a 5-inch flare, regardless of yellow brass, red brass, Coprion for all I care, it is a dark sounding horn for sure if you approach it gently. I find it to be quite a bit darker actually than my shoe. That's of course a video for another time. I'd love to do an old versus new Yamaha video, that'll be for another time. But the biggest difference I note with these older Yamahas is they really do lean towards the darker and broader side of the fence. Even if they have the same sort of geometry as their modern counterparts, there still is a little bit more leaning towards a dark and full sound and a little bit less of an ability to climb into the stratosphere. Now granted, every Yamaha and Schilke out there is outstanding above the staff. But with my 732, we're talking about, maybe on the double register exam, it earned a 95%, whereas my shoe earned 100%. The 732 and indeed the 634, they're still A-grade horns. They're just not quite A+ up there like my shoe is. That was one thing I noticed about my 732 where, maybe I still prefer my shoe if I'm playing lead. But both of these horns are quite free-blowing in the sense that they have that reverse lead pipe design that really just feels right the way I blow down the horn. I like a nice steady stream of air, I like big legatos, I like slurring through as much as possible, and I find that things like reverse lead pipes and big bells, regardless of the bore at the valve section, really help me at attaining these sound concepts. Additionally, both have really outstanding clarity in my opinion in the lower register. You might not hear that come across in the videos because I'm not a lower register player by any means, but for both, I found a really fat low C and quite good notes even below it. And it is for these reasons and many more that these two horns are getting a great big SAM seal of approval from me today. I think Yamaha's early professional models are some of the absolute best value on the market if you are a serious student looking to step up to your first professional trumpet. It really does not get much better than finding something like my 732 for $800. That is almost an unfathomable deal. When I saw it, I almost thought it too good to be true. I decided to sleep on it. I slept on it and I could resist it no longer. I snagged it and I've been very happy with my purchase since. It's less so that this is my backup trumpet. Rather, it is now my classical trumpet. And the shoe is my jazz trumpet. They feel incredibly similar to play, despite being manufactured something like 40 years apart, and they really are both just incredible players that have the sort of sounds for what I'm looking to do with my playing. They feel great, they sound great, the whole 9 yards. I understand a lot of people favor the sort of box strad, double braced, sort of heavier design, and that's all well and good. But if you know you are the type of player not to prefer that, this is very much an avenue you should consider exploring. It's hard to get to try these instruments before you buy because a lot of them are out of production and fairly scarce, but even then, I find a fair amount of them go online for quite cheap, and I think they are real sleeper picks as a result, and that's exactly what I like discussing on this year's Scholastic Brass Special. Now, we are not wrapping up the video yet. We have one more big segment to go over before we put a bow on today's video. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the information from this video came from the Trumpet History website that you can find in the description, and indeed in this last segment here where we're going to kind of break down Yamaha's model numbering and talk about which one you might consider for your uses based on your preferred specs, this information also comes from Glen X on that site. The one thing that I've done here is consolidate it into a table so that it's a little bit more easily readable because the text on the website frankly looks like it was copied and pasted one too many times, and it is not super well formatted or very well readable. So we're going to take a look at this table here and break down what we see as far as Yamaha model numbers go. Firstly, these are all YTR models. YTR just indicates Yamaha trumpet. And we'll note that there are a couple of medium bores, a couple of medium large bores, and a couple large bores. So we have some options here. What you'll also notice is that we have a couple of fairly clear-cut generations. There was the first 5 or so years of Yamaha's professional manufacturing, and then the second 5 years, which I've dubbed Gen 1 and Gen 2. These are not official terms by any means. Yamaha is not very good at publishing specific dates at which certain instruments were built or keeping track of their serial numbers. Just in general, it's really hard to date anything from Yamaha's trumpet line. So these are fairly approximate numbers that probably weren't entirely enforced. Like, I'm sure there were certain 72 to 77 models that were produced a little bit earlier or a little bit later, but these are the generations in which they're most commonly regarded to have been built. So let's start with our medium bores. Based on the Schilke B6 and B7, we have here a couple of different models, the 32 series and the 36 series. Each of those has a 6 series lacquered counterpart and a 7 series silver-plated counterpart. Both of them have the full 5-inch bell and that medium sort of step bore that I described earlier. And what you'll note is that the 732 belongs to sort of the first generation, 72 to 77, and the 36 to the second generation. Now, in 82, Yamaha totally revamped their trumpet line. They came out with 4-digit model numbers and whatnot, but eventually what we ended up with along this branch of the family tree was indeed the bobby shoe that I play on now, the 8310Z. So that's pretty cool. And now moving on to our medium larges. Both based on the Schilke B5, we have the 34 and the 37. Once again, we have our lacquered 6s and silver-plated 7s. These are both medium-large bores. They both have the full-sized 5-inch bell. I like medium-large and 5-inch a lot more than I do medium-large and 4 7/8 for the record. And once again, we have a sort of Gen 1 and Gen 2 split here between the 34 and the 37. You'll note that both the horns we played in this case were indeed Gen 1s, quote-unquote. Again, these are not official dates or generations, but that's kind of the best we can do, is approximate. And the current closest equivalent of these horns is the reverse lead pipe variant of the Xeno 8335, which is very much your daily driver, medium-large sort of instrument, fairly agreeable one for a lot of people, I think. And lastly, we have our large bores, based on a couple of different Schilkes here, the X3, which had the full 5-inch bell, and the B3, which had a 4 7/8. We have the 738, which did not seem to have a 6 counterpart, and the 639 and 739. Now, these are fairly specialized instruments. I don't think the manufacturing dates are quite as clear-cut on these. There wasn't very much a Gen 1 and Gen 2 here. It was more like, hey, we need a large bore trumpet. Let's try a couple things and see what sticks. The closest current equivalent, I would say, is the Xeno 8345 reverse lead pipe, which is indeed a large bore, and that's obviously a lot less of a ubiquitous instrument, but a fair amount of people do like that large bore and 4 7/8 combination, even if I personally don't. Now, as one last note, Serial numbers from Yamaha are really hard to keep track of. Yamaha is not that great at anything dealing with chronology, whether it's when an instrument was manufactured or what a serial number dates back to, but the one reliable thing we have here is that if the serial number ends with an A after the numbers, which was not the case for either of the two horns in this video, by the way, rather than being assembled in Japan, like most of Yamaha's trumpets, it was assembled actually in the United States, and supposedly even under the supervision of Schilke and his craftsmen. People say that if you find one of these American-assembled Yamahas that is already a clone of a Schilke, you're essentially playing on a Schilke. The big difference between these Yamahas and Schilke trumpets is that they're made with Yamaha parts in Japan most of the time. So if you have a US-made one, it's widely regarded by Glen X and plenty of others that you're essentially holding onto a Schilke, which I think is pretty cool. With that said, while a lot of people claim that the A serial numbers are better players than the Japanese assembled ones, every Yamaha Japan-made trumpet that I've played has generally been superb. I think that's about all I have to say there. And that, at long last, will conclude today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can check out more instrument reviews up in the top right corner in the card if you want to get your fix. But here's my advice. We've got a lot more content coming out for this year's Scholastic Brass Special, so if you're one of my very many unsubscribed viewers, the vast majority of my viewers, I would highly recommend changing that if I were you. You wouldn't want to miss out. Anyhow, until next time, I really appreciate you sticking around, and we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support the creation of bigger and better content on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, have your name featured right here, and a whole host of other perks and benefits, then please consider pledging your support at patreon.com/SamuelPlaysBrass. For now, you can find more videos in the end screen cards to my left.